Hello, this is Tom for Tabletop Tap Room. Today we're looking at the heads and tails of artifacts from the first edition D&D. Because the rules in the DMG would seem to imply that you could randomly roll up an artifact as part of a treasure hoard. And then the rest of the rules would seem to contradict that. So we're going to dig into that today as we go through our series on magic items in Dungeons and Dragons. But before we get there, let me just say thanks for watching the video. Thanks to my subscribers. You guys are great. And don't forget that like, subscribe, and bell icon. Help me build the channel. Now, we are looking at the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide picture here, starting about page 155. So on 155, it says, each artifact or relic is a singular thing of potent powers and possibly strange side effects as well. Regardless of how many of these items come into your campaign, only one of each may exist. As each is placed by you or found by the players, you must draw a line through this listing on the table to indicate it can no longer be discovered randomly. If the dice indicate an item is no longer available, you may substitute a clue as to its whereabouts or simply ignore the result so that no magic item is found at all. So it's pretty explicit that the artifacts could be found randomly, i.e. you're rolling up a treasure hoard and it's result comes up miscellaneous, and then it comes up for the table of artifacts, and then you roll on that table and you get an artifact. Now, the problem being is that that's as far as you can go with the random placement of an artifact, because it has minor powers, major powers, and prime powers, and then you have minor malevolent effects and major effects, and then what is just plain labeled side effects, it should be prime side effects, so no confusion. But you can't roll these. It is not possible to roll these. You actually have to pick these, and the book does enshrine this idea of that you, the game master, must do some design work. So let's look at all the other rules and concerning artifacts, and then dig into this a little bit deeper and see if we can't parse out what is going on with this random placement of artifacts in a campaign. Now, however, we learn that each artifact is unique, and the DM must do design work to flesh it out and place it in the campaign. Players are to be in the dark as to the true powers and of the artifact, and the artifacts are to be carefully guarded by location, warding devices, and monsters. Now, I do not interpret warding devices strictly as traps, but certainly some of those puzzles where you've got to figure out the puzzle to be able to advance or to get access to a secret room, or maybe you don't have all the information that would allow you to solve that puzzle, so you got to go away and come back after doing some research. Warding devices could be anything from traps to those sorts of things. And location implies that it must be very difficult to access this location to get at this artifact. Now, this speaks powerfully against artifacts being randomly rolled, because you could just be doing random geomorphs and random, monsters showing up. That is not necessarily going to produce the kind of game being described here, where artifacts are placed, and they are placed in very difficult locations with plenty of warding devices and monsters guarding them. Now, recovery of an artifact should only be undertaken by the most high-level and powerful of characters, and after lengthy attempts to recover it. Okay, this is explicitly stated there in those pages following 155 in the DMG. So that would speak against a random placement. It also goes on to say that there may be a body of knowledge concerning the artifact, but only rumors will be available, and extensive oral or written information must be sought out at great expense. Now, I just want to point out on this point, before we get back into the list of rules covering artifacts, is that this idea of just rumors and then it deeper information must be sought out at great expense and time mirrors what we see in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when Gandalf is a little bit troubled by this magic ring. He's a little bit worried about it, but he's not sure, and he must go and do research. And then he comes back and he does the ultimate test of casting the ring into the fire, and they discover that it is the One Ring because the fire letters show up on it, and it's written in Frodo says it's some form of Elvish, and he's it's the speech of Mordor. And so that mirrors that experience of and also the fact that the players don't know all the powers because the powers are not set, the side effects are not set until the game master chooses them. That also mirrors what we see in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, because nobody really knew all the effects of the ring. They did not know what it was going to do to, they did not understand what it was doing to Gollum's life and what it did to Bilbo's lifespan. And so it had effects that were unknown and only discovered over the course of time. So very much we see Gygax is writing into these rules, besides the fact that you find one randomly, he's trying to write in an experience that mirrors The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit with the One Ring, which certainly would qualify as an artifact. Number 6, the relics and artifacts are merely exemplars of what you could have in your campaign. So the DMG has a whole list of things, the machine of Lun the Mad and so on and so forth. The Orb of Might, the Crown of Might, the Scepter of Might, all these things. They're merely exemplars. They're actually, you can use them, but they're given there and you can completely rewrite their history. You can completely rewrite their powers, their abilities. You can write in a nemesis. We're going to get to that in a second here. But what's important is that you do not make a super weapon. That they be balanced. Now, there's no real instruction on balancing these things, but I've got I got a light to shine on that for you because I've done a spreadsheet on all the powers, how much of what and how much of this and how much of that for each of the artifacts. So it's important that they be balanced. They're not to be super weapons, and there is a table for their destruction. There's like a 5-point table at the very end of the section of tables on powers and side effects that gives you some ideas on how the item might be destroyed. Now, not all items you're going to want to destroy all items. For instance, if you've got the teeth relic, there's a teeth relic where you put the tooth in your mouth and it grafts to one of your teeth. You're probably not going to want to destroy that one. One, it's in your head and it's permanently grafted in there. Only comes out with your death, number one. But it doesn't, because it's of this cleric and it seems like it was meant to be like a good item, I guess. You're probably not looking to destroy that one. But others, Hand of Vecna, Eye of Vecna, Wand of Orcus. These could certainly qualify as items that need to be destroyed. And that would be a major quest. You would have it'd be a major campaign or plot point, the destruction of the weapon. And again, this whole idea of destroying the weapon, the artifact, it mirrors Bilbo, Frodo, Lord of the Rings, mirrors what Tolkien wrote in his books. And it seems like Gygax is concerned to give you that Lord of the Rings experience that we all had reading, and we enjoyed those books, and we lived vicariously through Frodo and Bilbo, and we just love those books. And this idea that the item can be so evil and causing so much death and destruction if it falls into the wrong hands, the nemesis, Sauron in this case, that it's necessary to destroy it, and it becomes a major plot point and campaign point. And I think this could be very cool to play out. Number 9, the rules for characters using hirelings and henchmen to discover the powers and effects. So there's a couple of paragraphs discussing what happens if the player characters go, we know this could have some bad side effects. Let's use the Nodwick. Let's use the henchman. Let's use a hireling to find out. We'll have them use it. What's going to happen under those circumstances? And if that hireling or henchman's harmed, what happens to morale to the rest of your henchmen and hirelings? Bad stuff can happen. So there's rules for that. I don't know that I would put a powerful artifact into the hands of a henchman or a hireling just to protect my player character. I think I would roll the dice. If I'm going to roll the dice, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm not letting the henchman or hireling roll the dice for me on finding out what the bad side effects could be for this item. But the rules are there because Gygax anticipated players actually pulling let's just send the Nodwick. Let's give it to the Nodwick, see what happens. That's number 9. Number 10, destruction should be a major story point, story, plot, or campaign consideration. This again mirrors the Lord of the Rings and suggests there should be a Sauron in the campaign by extension. So not only are you designing the artifact, not only are you writing this body of lore, which does not exist in the DMG, you are creating the nemesis, the Sauron, for the campaign. And by extension, there is a world-altering or world-threatening or world-ending plot by said Sauron that is in play, and the players have to deal with it. Maybe they don't wish to take the One Ring to Mordor and cast it into the fires of Mount Doom. Maybe they just are looking to pull a Morkborg and, survive the end of the world somehow, do the best they can in that situation. Now, a nemesis is something worth having for the players with the artifact. Some artifacts have built-in nemesis. For example, Vecna certainly qualifies as a built-in nemesis for the Eye and Hand of Vecna. Orcus certainly qualifies as a nemesis for the Wand of Orcus, but many of the archdevils would also qualify as a nemesis for the Wand of Orcus. They might wish to get their hands on it, and then bad things could happen if they get their hands on it. And, partly the reason why is that there's this war between the Abyss and the Nine Hells. It's always going on. And so maybe the archdevils or archdevil in question wants to embarrass Orcus somehow by getting his hands on the Wand of Orcus. The hut of Baba Yaga, built-in nemesis. Baba Yaga must exist somewhere, sometime, and she may not like the player characters running around literally in her hut. So his nemesises are great for the campaign, and they can complicate the player character's life. They can add story elements. Certainly, you would not have the Lord of the Rings without Sauron. I mean, without Sauron being in the background, and he really doesn't show up. You don't need the nemesis to show up and, bash people around. He could just be moving. He's off in the distance doing stuff, and his lieutenants are doing stuff. And there's very little to almost no interaction with him, as we see in the Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, you could do that. You could, clearly have that sort of a thing going on where the nemesis is so bad that you don't really want to meet him in an encounter, where bad things are going to probably happen, and TPKs are certainly on the menu for today. They are the special. Today's special is TPK. Now, many of these items, it states in the book that many of these items tend to make their possessor reclusive, secretive, arrogant, and or greedy. Pretty much what we saw with the One Ring. These effects are best to handle through manipulation. I do not like this statement. However, it says handle through manipulation of the player by means of the powers and non-player characters. Now let's break that down a little bit. So some of the powers, some of the side effects, like for instance, there's one that if you use a major power, the side effect comes into play. This major side effect is that everybody within a certain radius of the artifact must save or flee in fear. And that includes the possessor of the artifact. They must make a fear save. And if they fail and they're fleeing, I interpret that to be they drop the artifact and flee. So now you have this item of great power has been dropped. And maybe there's an enemy that has made their fear save. And you run away. You use the power, but then you drop the item and run away. And so then the ogre is sitting there going, he's too stupid to be afraid. So he somehow managed to ace that roll. And now he picks up this item of great power. So that is one means by which you could manipulate people through the actual powers on the item. The other, where it says NPCs, really reminds me of that scene where Gandalf is trying to pressure Bilbo to give up the ring and pass it to Frodo. And so you have, it's a significant scene in the Lord of the Rings, and it would not happen without Gandalf being there and being a strong presence and pushing him to do it. So that's certainly open to NPCs, manipulation. I would think you're going to be role-playing that out. Maybe the player will realize to a certain extent what's going on and play along with it. Maybe not. I think it's going to be a mixed bag using an NPC to manipulate the player characters, because ultimately it's the player who's being manipulated, and that could just, you just don't know how that's going to go. I don't know if I like manipulation. However, this in some ways mirrors lycanthropy, where the player is beginning to lose control of their character because of this affliction that has come upon them. So I think you could do some of that where it's just, look, this is what's happening to your character. You need to play this way, or they become an NPC due to this effect of this artifact. And at that point, the player begins looking at it as, this is a cursed item. We must get rid of it for the sanity and well-being of my character. And at that point, they begin to realize, maybe we need to figure out how this thing can be destroyed. Maybe we need to make sure that it doesn't fall into the hands of the nemesis, lest I fall under that power's sway. So it begins to raise the stakes for the player characters. And just going with I think communicating with the player and saying, this is what's happening. This is how you must play your character to a certain extent. I think communicating with the player is a little bit better than manipulation. So I didn't like that word manipulation in the rules, but it's there. So, number 13, potential prime and major powers of artifacts have major consequences for characters in the setting, and these should not be undone lightly. No wish spell. So if some bad effect has happened to you because of an artifact, getting a ring of wishes, or the magic user in the party getting a wish spell, This stuff does not work. You do not undo what these artifacts do. In fact, aside from divine help, there's no hope. And even with divine help, it needs to be the god or deity who created the artifact who could then undo some of its effects. So Gygax is very explicit. These things are bad mojo, and they have serious consequences, and they cannot be undone, even through Ring of Wishes, a limited wish. None of that stuff is going to work to undo these effects. These effects are permanent. Now, all of the above would suggest that these items cannot be random. I think that the early play style of the group in Lake Geneva and the Blackmore group, where you had as much as 20 people playing, not everybody would show up on that Saturday. 8 to 12 might show up that Saturday. They're the ones who go into the mega dungeon. And they had a stable of characters such that if the order of the day was 3rd level characters versus 5th level characters, they would have a stable of characters. So I think under those circumstances, that style of play and the fact that there was a slightly more prominent element of player versus player in those early days of the Lake Geneva group and the Blackmore group, that this idea that, you've randomly rolled up the artifact, Crown of Might, but so-and-so has that Crown of Might. So the game master, rather than have you find a Crown of Might, because it already exists in the campaign, they give you a clue of where the Crown of Might is. That implies that you're going to go and take it from that guy. You're going to go get it from that guy. And he's not going to give it up willingly, so you're going to, it fights on, baby. So, I think that this idea of random placement of artifacts, even though all the other rules would pile up to say, no, that does not happen in this campaign, that they did allow it to happen in those early days. And so this statement from Gary, and let me just throw it back up on the screen, this statement that, it's discovered randomly, indicate that it can no longer be discovered randomly. So, I think that this was a feature of those early play styles in Lake Geneva. And since more modern D&D is a lot less PvP for the most part, okay, you're free to disagree with me, and I get it. Maybe your table has a more PvP allowances than mine. I don't like player versus player violence per se, but more modern play of D&D leans away from PvP. So my advice would be no random placement of these items, because of all the other rules, that you need to craft that nemesis, craft that method of destruction, craft all of that body of information that's going to be out there on that thing, and craft the location that's difficult to access and all of the warding devices and monsters that are guarding it, so that this is not something that just happens because we're rolling up a goblin horde and we get a magic item and, we now have in this goblin horde the machine of Lund the Mad, because that wouldn't make much sense, but you could, I'm sure, craft a story around that. Why is the machine of Lund the Mad in those goblin, tunnels? That would be an interesting story. Now, to play devil's advocate, I would also contend that although it's writer's fiat that Bilbo, by chance, Gollum lost the ring, by chance Bilbo was crawling and he felt something cold and metal and he just stuck it in his pocket and he kept on going, that it was pure chance, pure random chance for Bilbo finding. That's how it comes across in the books, even though clearly the author, by fiat, totally meant for that to happen for the sake of the story. It comes off as by chance. And Bilbo certainly doesn't come off as a high-level character. Neither does Frodo. So I would say that because Gary was seeking to emulate Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits so much with these artifacts, that you could allow for a seemingly random result where an artifact that has a nemesis and that has a means of destruction and that has terrible consequences for the world should it make its way back into the hands of that nemesis, that you could allow for that in your game, but you'd want to be careful, I would think, for sure. Now, at first glance, there is no rhyme or reason to the breakdown of powers and effects at first glance. But I did a spreadsheet and just breaking down all of the effects and versus the powers. And I really think that some patterns stood out. Now, there's always some outliers. There's always some exceptions. And like, for instance, the ratio of minor benign powers to minor malevolent effects is you see ratios of 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 5-to-1 minor powers and only one negative. That's in the hand of Vecna, that ratio. 3-to-2 for the Machine of Lund the Mad, and 6-1 for the Servant of Lucio. However, 2-to-1 seems to be the most common ratio of minor powers to minor effects. So 2-to-1, but you could easily just roll a d6 and have the a d3, d6 divided by 2, round up, where it's going to determine 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1. Those seem to be the most common. 5-to-1 is an outlier, 3-to-2 is an outlier, and 6-to-1 is an outlier. So I would go with either rolling a d3 or just flat out use 2-to-1 as a very popular ratio for these powers. Now, on the major powers, it goes two ways. You can have a major power and a full prime side effect that comes into play because of the major power. And that only happens because there are no prime powers for this particular artifact. So it has major powers, but it has no... I don't know if you guys hear that, but that is my dog snoring. Let me just go wake him up. So, where was I before I was so rudely interrupted by the dog? He's totally sawing logs, louder than a human being. The dog snores. It's crazy. So, my major effects. Now, the major powers can be paired with major effects. And if that happens, then that usually means that there's probably going to be a prime power in play. So I would roll a d6, and on a 1 to 4, it's a major effect. And on a 5 and a 6, it'll be a prime side effect, the more severe side effects that would pair with it. So, and the ratio, where's my ratios here? Okay, the ratios are either 1-to-1 for major powers and major effects, or 2-to-1, 2 major powers to 1 major side effect. So again, this is the point where you must decide whether there's going to be a prime power for this item. Many artifacts don't actually have a prime power. Now, when the ratio for prime powers to prime effects is 1-to-1. So if you're going with a prime power on the artifact, it will be a 1-to-1 ratio with prime effects. And that's how you're going to keep the artifacts that you create for your campaign in balance, is to follow these guidelines. They're not actual rules in the book, but just inferring from the breakdown of powers for all the artifacts. And, you know, my table's not perfect, like the Horn of Change. I did not, the Horn of Change is like a weird situation. So I just put special all the way across and didn't even consider it. And the Rod of Seven Parts is handled a little bit differently than everything else. And so that was special. And the Teeth of Doliver Nar, again, another special circumstance. So, you know, I didn't really consider those particular items as I was charting all of the ratios. Now, I thought for the very end here, let's create an artifact. I'm going to pull up Gary Gygax's Dangerous Journeys. Originally named Dangerous Dimensions. Gary Gygax's D&D. He got sued over this. It nearly bankrupted Games Design Workshop. And eventually the trademark and this game ended up being purchased outright by TSR. And they paid Gary a lot of money. He never revealed, as far as I know, how much he got in that settlement. But this is a great setting book, if you can get a hold of it. There are PDFs out there on those scribe type file sharing websites. You know the one I'm talking about. You can actually find this there. You know, I would at least download the PDF, check it out, and you'll see this is really a great resource and setting guide. Now, what's interesting about this is that, you know, the map kind of looks like Aerth. You know, it's called Aerth, Aerth, the Epic of Aerth. And you see all of these Albion here in England, and Francia, and Burgundy, and Germania, Saxony, Teutonia, Poland. And so Gary did a ton of research putting this together. And when you go to, like, here's the listing for Albion. And I like, you know, the breakdown, the thumbnail sketch on it here. They tell you the magical devices in Albion. Excalibur, the name we all recognize. I did not want to make up Excalibur as an artifact. So we're actually going to go to Francia and where are you? Magical devices. And in here is the Horn of Roland. Horn of Roland. Roland was a knight who served Charlemagne, and he had some really fantastic victories. And the Horn of Roland, very much in the vein of Boromir's horn, summoned reinforcements critical to winning a battle. And so Gygax looked at that, and there's artwork of Roland blowing the horn on horseback. So I think Gygax was riffing off of that and that classic artwork, and included the Horn of Roland. So let's make up a Horn of Roland. Now it needs a basic thing that it's what it ends up being described in the DMG. So the Horn of Roland will increase morale of allies by +1, and 1 time per day it can summon 10d10 hit dice of like-aligned reinforcements that will show up in d20 turns. Not 100% on that. Like if you're in a dungeon, you know, maybe the hit dice, maybe it should be 5d10, 10d10. You can end up with 50 hit dice. You know, this is an artifact. It should be powerful. And then I decided that it would have 2 benign powers, and the benign powers that I went with were the possessor is immune to fear, and the possessor can remove fear with a touch. And I thought these kind of fit this particular item. The minor Malavin effect is deafness for 1 to 4 turns when it's used to summon aid. The major power is +2 armor class, or AC 10. Now that's descending armor class, Thaco, obviously. So I think the AC would be +2 to armor class, or an 18 or a 19, whichever is better for the player character. And the prime effect, the user has limited. So I went with one major power, which was the whole armor class buff, because this, Roland, he really kind of, stayed the course in these battles he's famous for. So I went with a major power and a prime side effect. And the prime side effect was the user has limited omniscience and may request the DM to answer one question per game day. Now, that doesn't sound like a bad side effect, and it doesn't, because not all of the side effects are really all that bad. Some of them are, but not every single one. And after going over the list repeatedly, I settled on this one. Now, what's really important to remember here is that it says the user may request the DM answer one question. No guarantee the game master will answer the question, but it is a may. You can ask. Doesn't mean I'm going to answer. So that's what I did for the Horn of Roland, and I took it right out of one of Gary's projects that he worked on, the Epic of Aerth. I just think it's a great and really in-depth setting, and I knew that it had these artifacts, and some of them were taken right out of history, right out of literature, and so I thought that would be a good place to go for one of these artifacts. That's the heads or tails. Yes, the explicit statements in the DMG is you can randomly roll an artifact. Everything else would seem to say no, and I think the reason that the random possibility is there for that early play style of those early groups in Lake Geneva and the Blackmore group. That's what I think. By and large, for your campaign, you're probably not going to randomly place an artifact. It just does, yeah, it seems like a bad idea. So this is Tom for Tabletop Taproom. I hope this was enlightening. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment below. Do you have house rules that you enforce on artifacts in your game? Have you included an artifact in your game? And, I really think that Gary was trying to deliver the classic Lord of the Rings experience of Bilbo and Frodo with the One Ring of Power, with what these rules that he created for, these items of great power. So this is Tom signing out. Keep on gaming, maybe even with an artifact or relic.